Tuesday the 27th of September 2022 at 7:04 a.m. Prophecy for the nations of Africa. With the great political crisis and natural disasters in Europe, America, and Asia, most great nations and organizations who granted loans to African nations would desire to cancel the loans. But every country whose loans are cancelled should be very vigilant, because they shall come for your land through many other means. And for those who do not collaborate, they shall try to create civil wars to crumble the nation and exploit their resources during the struggle. This is a call for the government of African nations and their citizens to be very vigilant, but above all, patriotic. Let personal interests not outgrow general interests. This is the word of the Lord for the nations of Africa for the years to come. Remember, let personal interest not outgrow general interest. That is the key to keeping your territories. God bless you. That was Prophet Samuel Fomba.
Leaders of 49 African nations are in Washington, D.C. this week for a 3-day Africa summit organized by the Biden administration. The U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit comes as the United States is trying to counter the growing influence of China and Russia in Africa. On Monday, Biden's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, revealed the United States is pledging $55 billion in economic, health, and security support for Africa over the next 3 years.
Nations of Africa, protect your land. Many shall strive to take hold of it directly by pressurizing leaders to sign treaties or create civil wars, or indirectly by corrupting leaders to sign treaties which are not in favor and benefit of the people.
Working closely with Congress, the U.S. will commit $55 billion to Africa over the course of the next 3 years, across a wide range of sectors to tackle the core challenges of our time. These commitments build on the United States' long-standing leadership and partnership in development, economic growth, health, and security in Africa over the past 3 decades.
I see power change hands, and some nations who formerly depended on others will now become those with the upper hand in treaties, deals, and agreements.
During the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit, President Biden's expected to express support for the African Union to join the G20 and to push for the United Nations Security Council to include a permanent member from Africa. Axios is also reporting Biden's planning his first trip as president to sub-Saharan Africa next year. The 4 nations were not invited to the Washington summit. Neither was Eritrea or leaders from Western Sahara, which has been occupied by Morocco since the 1970s. The summit comes as the U.S. continues to expand its military presence in Africa. President Biden recently sent U.S. troops back into Somalia, reversing an order by Donald Trump to withdraw troops. The Washington, D.C. meeting of 49 African leaders, who's there and who isn't?
Good morning, Amy. It's great to be with you. The summit comes at a time when the U.S. and the Biden administration specifically is hoping to demonstrate its commitment to Africa at a time when Africa's geostrategic significance is on the rise, and at a time when U.S. influence on the continent is on the decline. So I think in the next few days, I think we can expect a good degree of performance and theater. The U.S. will be attempting to demonstrate that it respects African leaders as equal partners, that it respects the sovereignty of African states. We can expect to hear a lot of talk about shared goals on issues ranging from peace and security to democracy, development, and climate change. And all in all, I think the U.S. is hoping to signal that it is doing something new and different here when it comes to U.S.-Africa policy, in the sense that it is taking African states seriously as geostrategic players in their own right. Now, when you look between the lines, you'll see that there are tensions that remain with tensions between this rhetoric and mainstream thinking in Washington, D.C., and I'm thinking here especially of Congress, which continues to be dominated by Cold War thinking that views Africa almost entirely through the lens of security and through the lens of geopolitical rival. Here I'm thinking specifically of Russia and China. We can take the example of a bill that was passed in the House earlier this year, almost unanimously. This bill was called Countering Malign Russian Activities in Africa Act, and the title speaks for itself, right? The objective of this bill is to monitor and effectively police Africa in its relations with Russia in terms of the kinds of agreements and partnerships that it might enter into. And some have interpreted this bill as an explicit response to, and in some ways even a form of punishment of African states for the way in which they voted at the UN General Assembly earlier this year in the wake of Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. You may recall that a good number of countries abstained in that vote. African states represented about half of those countries that abstained, roughly 17 of them. And the U.S. was extremely frustrated by these developments and failed to take into account the extent to which African states were making this decision on their vote based on their own geopolitical interests.
Africa will soon become the oasis in the desert as America and Europe shall run into great political and economic crisis. Because of the situations in which Europe and America find themselves, there shall be a mass exodus towards Africa.
Let me ask Professor Al-Baluchi about Biden supporting a move for an African seat on the UN Security Council and also announcing that he wants the African Union to join the G20 as a permanent member. The significance of this.
I think what's significant about these statements from the Biden administration is how late they are coming, in the sense that other leaders, other governments have been at the forefront of calling for precisely these things, right? Having a permanent seat on the Security Council, having a permanent seat at the G20, and the U.S. is effectively late to the table, right? And only making these proposals because it knows that it has to, because it knows that if it doesn't support more of a role for Africa on the global stage, that it will lose out to the other powers that have been saying this, that have been making this case for many years now.
Africa. Remember sometime earlier I gave you a prophecy saying, with the crisis in America and Europe, most of these world powers shall turn to African nations, trying to collaborate with them, trying to integrate them into many things. And this, they will see as open doors. But I told you, these are plans for them to strip you of your land and your natural resources. Because in all their crises they are facing right now, they don't think about your good. What they're trying to do right now is to camouflage friendship and lead you into signing treaties and taking other decisions that at the beginning may seem good for you because of the huge amounts they shall propose. But beneath, they're trying to indebt you in order to gain control of your land and your resources once more, as they have done for many years. So that prophecy I gave was an advice to the presidents of Africa and Africans in general to protect all that is theirs. Because with all the crises the world powers are facing right now, they shall turn to African nations, trying to collaborate, trying to integrate the African nations into their systems, trying to propose huge sums of money. But let these nations not fall prey to this, because at the end, they shall regret and their populations shall suffer the consequences. So this is an advice from God to the nations of Africa. Preserve your land and preserve your sovereignty. Don't give in to their tricks, because they are not there to help you. They are there to steal from you. That was Prophet Samuel Fomba. Shalom.